Happy February, everyone, from your Anchorage Symphony Orchestra. And we are so delighted to be able to share some information with you about the upcoming concert that will feature some wonderful romanticisms. So, Elizabeth, welcome. And we're enjoying lots of snow in January and February, of course. And wow, the symphony had a busy January with silent movie and neighborhood concert and an amazing Latin Vistas concert. So what are your reactions to what the orchestra experienced in January with you?
I have to say it was just one exciting moment after the next. I think that the neighborhood concert that we do is one of the most important things we do all year, reaching out to just a whole auditorium full of enthusiastic young families and young musicians and people that are intrigued by what the orchestra can play and can create. So it's very exciting to have that kind of, to share our love for what we do and what we play, and bring people along. And we hope build new musicians for the future and also audiences for the future.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Latin Vistas was an epic concert. At the end, I sort of stood on the podium going, I can't believe we just did that. That's how I felt about that whole concert, because that was a hard concert for the orchestra. Every single piece was super hard. There wasn't one opportunity for let up the whole night. People had to be counting. They had to be just ready to play at the drop of they were playing all the time. So it was a tour de force for the orchestra. And I think the audience got it, which is really cool, because that was the point, to create this just epic experience for our audience. And I know that it changed the orchestra too. Several members of the orchestra said, wow, this was quite something. And for me too, I just sat there going, wait, this just happened. This just happened. That's how I felt. It was astonishing, because I was in it and I wasn't aware. You're not conscious of that it's happening. You're making it happen. And then all of a sudden, when it's done, you're like, it did happen, and it was incredible. So it's one of the highlights for me of my entire career. So I hope for the orchestra it was a high point for them too. I just feel like it's a high watermark.
Yes. The energy on stage and the vibe with the audience, it was a really remarkable evening. And a lot of joy at the end for all of us. So
fantastic.
Yay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, 13 percussionists, what can I say? There aren't that many cities that could do that. Really, I'm trying to, it's really true. You don't have any orchestras do that unless you have a specialty conductor for whom it is, their signature piece, and they're bringing it around the world as their guest conducting piece. Otherwise, it doesn't get programmed very often because it's cost prohibitive, and also space prohibitive. But the Atwood stage can hold a lot of people, and it's, we can create miracle concerts like that.
Yes. And we're opening up more since COVID now. And in February, we have the first young people's concert we've been able to do since COVID. And a new kind of format, working with Carnegie Hall, a program that you have a lot of experience with, and involving some of the local students as co-hosts, high school students. And so the symphony is busy even when it's not our classic concert night yet again, and another important outreach program that's really important and curriculum driven too. Correct. For the schools.
Yeah, and it's mission driven, I think, for the orchestra. It's really mission driven. I'm a big, as Randy was, I continue to be absolutely devoted to the education of our rising generation, and to playing a part in that by giving them the experience of not only learning about music, but actually making music with the orchestra. And that's why I love Link Up, because it offers that opportunity for collaboration. They are learning how to read music. They are learning more and more about the pieces that they're going to play with us. They're learning, some of them are even learning how to play the recorder so that they'll play with us. Others will clap and sing with us. but all will participate. So it's very exciting. And there's even a little bit of dance moves. So, there's total involvement. And as you say, it's in the curriculum of the school, of their school experience. Their
Mhm.
music teachers are using the guides provided by Carnegie Hall for free, I may add, which is one of the main reasons we can do the program, is that
Mhm.
these materials are offered to us for free. Now, of course, there are costs getting the kids to the hall, getting the orchestra on the stage, hiring the stage, blah, blah, blah. All of that, that's our cost. But the materials themselves do come to us without charge, which is pretty extraordinary.
So busy February,
Yeah.
and we have a classic concert coming up,
Yes.
and an evening of Mendelssohn and Louise Farrenc and Beethoven. So let's talk
Yes.
a little bit about the Mendelssohn, which begins one of his standalone overtures about a water sprite, Melusina. And I don't think the symphony's played this before in Anchorage, but what speaks to you about this piece and using it as a concert opener for this evening of romantics?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons for this. One is I love Mendelssohn. So there's one. And we often do his Hebrides or the Midsummer Night or any of those others. Programmatically, it's a very interesting piece of music. It's definitely connected to depiction
Mm-hmm.
of the character and her milieu. If she's a water sprite, she's in water, and we begin immediately with the flowing water figuration in the winds. It's very sinuous. It's different than it has some of those aspects of the rugged Scottish symphony in there too. You can hear
Mm-hmm.
some of his as he's hearkening back to the old tales of Scott, of the famous poet, Scottish poet. All of that. So he's using the materials of folk tale, folk music that he's used before in symphonic efforts and others. But he's also using his artistic ability. He was quite an extraordinary artist, especially with watercolors. And I always think that he thought in his music, he thought in colors. And so I think it just is an opportunity for us to hear him in a different way. It has a more flowing character at the beginning. It's just a little bit different than Mendelssohn that we're used to, which is usually flash right out from. I mean, the Scottish starts out brooding, of course, but this one is just, it flows. I think it's a graceful, beautiful piece of music, and I thought it would be a nice introduction, the water sprite, the magical creature, into the woman composer, which is also a magical creature, actually, because it, it is mythical, and for a long time forgotten and ignored, and but the power was always under the water, stirring. And so it's kind of my hidden message about Louise Farrenc, who was, of course, a extremely gifted and well-regarded person in her lifetime, but immediately lost to time.
Mm-hmm.
So the Mendelssohn as well. This one is not as often done, and I think it's a very attractive piece, and I think the orchestra will play it well. So it has a little bit of hidden subtext, but that's just me personally sharing that.
Well,
It is
love
necessarily
some,
you won't be able to read that. I'm just telling you
yeah,
about it.
yeah. So you're in the know if you're tuned into Words on Music to find out
Correct.
special
Yeah.
secrets about what's
Yeah,
happening.
it's a graceful, beautiful, brilliant piece of music by Mendelssohn, and it's very romantic. And what I mean by that, it takes the folk tale and lifts it up and sort of tells the story.
Mm-hmm. Now, so instead of a concerto on this concert, then we're going to have the Third Symphony, which is really rising in terms of numbers of performances it's getting now, that there's more attention being given to this amazing composer. So have you conducted this before?
No, this was the suggestion last year when I was conducting the Buffalo Philharmonic. I had dinner with their music director, Joanne Falletta, after the concert and after the last concert. And we were just talking. She had just finished, I guess, recording or performing a number of Fahrenk's music symphonies or overtures. And she said, "Oh, you should definitely look at the third. That's very special." So I did, and I immediately loved it and immediately wanted to program it and thought it would be perfect for it. It takes the place of the concerto, but she was a great pianist. So I like
Yeah.
to think of her as the soloist who is also a great composer. And so we're going to put her music, since she can't be with us, we'll put her music there with for in place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of opportunity, a showcase for a new voice to our ears, but someone who clearly mastered the form, understood it deeply, and I think contributed greatly. One doesn't think of the French as being great symphony writers, but that's because they're not looking in the right direction. And
Mm-hmm.
Saint-Saëns, of course, wrote a couple symphonies. We know of Bizet's early attempt, the number one, which is just a glorious piece of music. And we know, of course, the great Franck D minor. And then we know that, we've been told that there are lesser efforts, peppered
Right.
around the 19th century. Wasn't an attractive form to France. They were big on opera.
Yes.
But what they're doing is downplaying the importance of Louise Fahrenk and her three contributions to the symphonic form, all of which are very distinguished. The third, I happen to think, is quite special. It was her last effort in that form, and there's probably lots of reasons for that. Despite her fame, despite her wealth as a publisher, she and her husband, a flute player, formed a publishing company that was distinguished in the 19th century, and a lot of French music was published by them. She was still not given the privilege of a libretto so she could write an opera, which I think this symphony is almost her saying, look, I can write an opera. Because especially with the last movement, which to me sounds like she's just pouring on the Rossini and the early French opera. You can hear it. You can even hear the later Bizet in her music. So he knew her, she knew him, and he must have heard some of her music, because you can hear the influence of her music in Bizet. That's my opinion. I'm sure Bizet experts would possibly disagree because they don't know the music of Louise Farrenc at all. But she was extraordinary. She was totally at the top. She equals any of those early 19th century, probably with the exception of Schumann, who is so extraordinary in his development, but she's a much better orchestrator. And she brings the audience along almost more easily than he does. He's experimenting a lot, and we know that, and we sense his greatness, and we sense his poetry. He's just so overwhelmingly great. But she is also great in that she has the French spirit, which is more direct and not so self-involved. Let's just say that. She's about virtuosity, but also form and rigorousness to harmonic language. So she knows all the rules, but she also makes it all beautiful. I just love it. I think I'm just delighted by her, and it was a wonderful discovery for me. I certainly recognized her name from having learned about women composers. It's not that her name was forgotten completely. It's just that there was no one to champion her music when she passed. And that often happens for women composers. I think of Florence Price, same thing, well regarded in her lifetime, opportunities for performance, but no one to really take it forward once she passed. And so decades go, and in our case, almost a century goes.
Well, it's really exciting to be able to have this work done in Anchorage with your Anchorage Symphony Orchestra, everyone. So looking forward to this as a highlight.
Yes. And that
And
kind of leads us into the Beethoven, and I'm only
yeah,
interrupting because you will hear a lot of Beethovenisms in this third symphony, and that's the one reason why I chose it. You'll even hear ba 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 ba. Whether or not it's a quote of Beethoven or not, I don't know, but it's what happens then is it's almost as if she's saying, here's Beethoven, and now look how I am voicing the winds in this next beautiful lyric passage, just like he did. And she does. She uses his use of winds and choice of wind combinations, pairs of winds,
mhm.
very similarly. And sometimes he'll have a phrase played by the bassoon, and then it goes to the clarinet, then it goes to the oboe, then it goes to the flute. She does the same thing where it's passed around, just like Beethoven does. And so I can't help but think that she is, of course, that symphony was played by the Conservatoire Orchestra, which was the greatest orchestra in the world in the 19th century, at least mid-century when this was performed. The Paris Conservatory was filled with great students and their teachers, and they played, and they were the highest virtuoso orchestra. So it was a big deal for her to have it played, and she heard it. And I'm sure she's saying to people who loved Beethoven, everyone loved Beethoven in France in the mid-century. He was a god. She's saying, look, I can do that. So we move on to Beethoven, and this is the monument, symphonic monument that arguably is, if not his greatest, it certainly is up in the top three.
Oh, definitely. I have to say it's one of my favorite symphonies. I
Mm-hmm.
could listen to it over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Every movement, not just the heralded allegretto, which is the
Mm-hmm.
most encored movement, lifetime, etc., but the whole symphony is just
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
So after an intermission and everyone's savoring having heard Louis Farrenc's gorgeous symphony, then we'll have Beethoven 7, which we haven't had on our stage in quite a few years. So um, what are some of your favorite things about the Seventh Symphony?
Well, I love the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
The opening is just probably one of the most amazing introductions because it tells us we are in for a ride.
Oh, yeah.
It is a harbinger of greatness coming on, power, majesty, sweeping gestures, grandness. It's just a grand symphony. Everything is laid out in wide gesture, wide vistas, and it immediately tells you, it immediately engages you, and it immediately confronts you with the fact that something special is going to happen. So I love the entry. I love the beginning. I love all the energy of the first movement. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, again, it's a powerhouse. It's motoric in the most elevated way, not in a repetitive way that makes you bored, but that just gets your heart beating faster, makes you want to skip forward with the music. The second movement, I take it at a faster pace than a lot of people. I don't see it as a dirge at all, but as a solemn dance.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of maybe a nod to antiquity a little bit on that kind of ancient dance kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But again, momentum is everything in that piece. And what
Rhythm.
I love about it, yeah, the dum bum 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 dee da, 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 that kind of thing. It propels you forward. Everything about this symphony propels you forward, and whips you into a froth by the end. I think that's it. But the
Yeah.
second movement, what I love about it is it's not like the third symphony, which has the great consideration of a great dead man, the funeral march of the third symphony. It's completely different, and anyone that likens them, and I think people did try to liken it to that. You don't have these interludes of I find this second movement the closest to Ravel that you can even imagine, just in
Uh,
terms of its motoric forward movement, but also its grace and its almost antiquity, a Grecian purity to it, which you find in Ravel, and which he was always trying to achieve, although he likened it more to Mozart than Beethoven. Maybe we would consider this his homage to Mozart. I have no idea, but it's a beautiful, beautiful second movement. There's no question. A third movement, I mean, every single movement is perfection.
Yes.
So it's hard to choose. It's really hard to choose. But I do think the second movement, the opening of the first movement, the last movement is, that one is as if he said to the orchestra, you can't be human beings now. You have to be superhuman to get through this, because it's just all of that. It's nonstop. And I can't even imagine what it looked like when he was composing it. I imagine it just spilling from him and him just sort of filling the page with his scrawls, which are so hard to decipher. It's amazing that his editors figured out where the notes were and everything. I can imagine that the gesture of that is very Beethovenian, the idea of him furiously scribbling his music down and trying to get it all out and trying to express himself in the most rigorous way. He put that into it. It's not full of resentment or anger. It's full of joy, and it just spills from him. So it's just a miracle of a symphony, frankly. There's nothing that you can complain about. That you can even talk about from a theoretical. There's no fault in it. Does that make sense? It's just pure. It's again joyous and uplifting, and can't wait. I mean, the orchestra will be exhausted. I've given them a huge thing when you don't have a concerto. Concertos are often easier for the orchestra. They have a lot of off time while the pianist or the violinist does their cadenza or whatever. This time the orchestra is on the whole time. So I've given them the big whammy in January, and now they're going to focus all of that energy and all of that endurance that we've been building into a concert that's going to need their endurance. It's going to need their focus all the way through. And they will do it brilliantly, of course.
Oh, can't wait. And there are no keyboard parts in this program, so
sorry, Susan.
Well, no, I love playing, but for this particular concert, it's going to be really fun to be in the audience and experiencing that with other human beings around me. So there's just nothing comparable to a live concert. So looking forward to engaging as an audience member on this one. And your enthusiasm is just contagious. So I look forward to all of us being together, the musicians and the audience, for this amazing program, and old friends and making a new friend with Louise Farink, and welcoming you back to the Atwood Concert Hall to work with us. So thank you, Elizabeth. And all of you, we're looking forward to a great February event, and then there's still more to come as spring approaches, and maybe we're going to see green grass someday again. So thank you all.
Thank you, Susan.
Pleasure.